Now, in today's video, we're going to be talking about a court case that's just recently come out of Massachusetts that might be the very beginning of national reciprocity. It may not, right? But it at least, I think, is going to be the starting off point. The court case is called Commonwealth versus Donnell. This is really fascinating, and the judge, it's a Superior Court judge, so this doesn't have any controlling legal authority unless the state of Massachusetts decides to appeal this decision. Then things can get really interesting, but like I said, it's the starting off point. So a little background on this. When the Bruen decision first came out, the Supreme Court articulated where the Second Amendment actually exists. And, you know, it's interesting because if you go back to the Heller decision, the Supreme Court in Heller focused really the intensity of its argument on the Second Amendment inside someone's home. And as a result of that, there was this anti-gun legal scholarship that started to develop to suggest that the Second Amendment only existed inside someone's home, that it didn't exist outside the home. Now, while that may seem ridiculous to all of us, this was starting to gain some steam. And Justice Thomas himself famously said, "The right to keep and bear arms does not mean bearing arms from your bathroom to your kitchen. It presupposes the idea that you can take a gun outside of your home." So sure enough, when the Bruen decision came out and Justice Thomas authored it, he articulated exactly where the Second Amendment exists, and it exists everywhere. People need to have the ability to bear arms outside of their home. Now, there's a number of ways people could bear arms. They could openly carry. If a state allowed for open carry, that would be a perfectly acceptable way for somebody to be able to exercise their Second Amendment rights. The state could mandate concealed carry only, and that would be okay too, as long as the state issued CCW permits based on objective criteria. Effectively, unless you're a prohibited individual, you should be allowed to carry a firearm. Or the state could just simply take themselves out of the equation altogether and become constitutional carry. But there has to be some method for somebody to be able to exercise this right. Hey guys, I'm pausing this video for just a moment. I want to talk a little bit about a giveaway that USCCA is doing, and what they're giving away is unbelievably cool. You can read all about it in the description just below this video, and definitely click on the link. All right, let's get back to the video. So this began a conversation between me and my law partner where I said, you know, I can't think of any other right that becomes bifurcated when you cross state lines. Now, we live here in California, and in California, they will only offer concealed weapons permits to California residents. That's a prerequisite for getting a CCW here, or a license to carry for those of you in other jurisdictions. Well, if someone lives in Nevada and they have a CCW in Nevada and they come to California for a vacation, there's no method that would allow them to carry a firearm when they're in California on vacation. California expressly prohibits open carry, and since this individual in Nevada is not a California resident, there's no way they could have a CCW. So there's no legal mechanism that would allow them to carry their firearm. Well, think about it from the standpoint of the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution. The Fourth Amendment protects you against unreasonable searches and seizures. If somebody lives in Nevada and they come to California, they don't suddenly lose their Fourth Amendment rights, right? The police can't just search their hotel room and claim, well, we don't need a warrant. You're not a California resident. That certainly wouldn't fly. And yet, the way the rubric is set up, that's essentially the way it would work with the Second Amendment. Yes, you can keep arms right? Even if you're a Nevada resident and you come to California, you can have your firearm with you in your hotel room, but you cannot bear arms. Essentially, the right becomes halved the minute you come into California. Well, evidently in Massachusetts, they have a similar sort of legislative rubric, right? So we have Mr. Donnell, who lives in New Hampshire, and he is a New Hampshire resident and has a license to carry in New Hampshire, and he comes to Massachusetts for one reason or another. I don't know the underlying fact pattern of this case, but he carries his firearm concealed. After all, I'm sure that Mr. Donnell carefully studied the Bruen decision and came to the same analysis that I did, that the Second Amendment would protect him even in Massachusetts. Well, there's obviously a law enforcement contact, and he's subsequently arrested for having a concealed weapon without having the proper documentation in Massachusetts. So he goes before a trial judge and he files a motion to dismiss, claiming his Second Amendment rights invalidate this statute. And the judge completely agrees and dismisses the case. And in this opinion that the judge gives, now again, I will say again, this is a Superior Court judge, so it's not controlling legal authority at this particular point. If the state appeals this decision and it goes to the Court of Appeals and the Court of Appeals ends up ruling in favor of the defendant, then it would be controlling legal authority in that circuit. That would cause most likely a circuit split, certainly between that circuit and our circuit, and that would most likely then take it all the way up to the Supreme Court. So this is potentially step one, so to speak. But his analysis of the Bruen decision is absolutely spot on. He goes through and he says, look, back in 1791, when, we look at the history of regulatory traditions on firearms, back at the time of the ratification, there were absolutely no prohibitions about colonists being able to move freely back and forth across these arbitrary colonial lines between the different colonies and subsequently between the different states. So there's no history of regulation on this. Therefore, the statute would fail under the Bruen test. Then he goes in and starts arguing some other points, cruel and unusual punishment and, privileges and immunity. So there's a lot of stuff in here, whether it's, a quote unquote bulletproof opinion, a jurist with a political agenda, as we've already seen, can do all sorts of intellectual gymnastics to come up with the decision that they ultimately want to come up with. In this particular case, though, the judge was spot on. Okay, yeah, it happens to be the opinion that I think is the correct one. And, by definition, anyone who agrees with me is by definition a genius, okay? But that notwithstanding, it is a very cogent analysis, fairly short one, but he makes, the state's case unconstitutional in very short order. It's only an 8-page opinion. We will have to see whether or not the state of Massachusetts now wants to appeal this. I suspect they might not. Very similar to some cases that we've seen in California challenging good moral character as a continual requirement to getting a CCW, which I also feel is unconstitutional under the Bruen analysis because that is absolutely a subjective test. When the Attorney General of California has been confronted with a lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of that penal code statute, they've essentially just given the CCW to the defendant or to the plaintiff so that the case would be moot, so that they could keep this law on the books, knowing full well that if it was actually to go before a court, it would be overturned. And I suspect Massachusetts may try to do the same thing. But in any event, we'll have to see. Like I said, it's good news. And what's nice to see is that we're having lower court judges especially in anti-gun states that are actually looking at the Bruen decision and coming up with the correct analysis. I have no idea what the underlying political affiliations are with this judge. And to be honest with you, it's utterly irrelevant. Whether they're pro-gun, anti-gun, Democrat, Republican, it's immaterial. The intellectual honesty in the opinion was spot on, and they deserve credit for that. So, as always, if you have any questions, you can email me directly at stephen@artemishq.com. As always, train constantly, train consistently, train repetitively, and train with purpose. Above all else, stay safe.
Before you go, you just missed one of our best videos that got over 500,000 views. Click right here to watch it now.